but you're going to have a tremendous advantage over them. First of all, you're all going to come out of here in one piece. That's more than one can say about the public schoolers, who, of course, get on drugs, get hooked to rock music, get involved in cults, girls who get pregnant and have their lives ruined, abort unborn children. That's the kind of thing that the public schoolers are going through. As a matter of fact, their lives, at least a third of them will have their young lives turned into a living hell, into a nightmare, when one's young life should be a happy time, a beautiful time of growth, enjoying the tremendous gifts that God has given all of us. And the public schools, of course, teach the children that they're animals, that there is no God, that they are the products of evolution, and therefore they don't even realize that they've been given these gifts. Take, for example, the gift of sex. Probably one of the most beautiful gifts that God has given us. What do they do in the public schools? They encourage, or they're encouraged by the philosophy in the schools, to indulge in sex at their will before they even know anything about it. And what is the result? Nightmares, disease, irresponsibility. Sex is a great gift that God has given us, and He's told us how to enjoy it. As a Christian, there's a certain way to do things. You start first, boy meets girl. Boy goes out with girl. Boy falls in love with girl. Girl falls in love with boy, mutual love. Then they get engaged. Then they get married. Then they go on a honeymoon, and then they have a family. What a beautiful sense of order. Everything works out perfectly, and happiness is possible. But what are the youngsters in the public schools taught? They're taught boy meets girl, boy and girl do it, boy and girl mess up their lives. Either they catch disease, and today's diseases, I can tell you, are killers. You're not dealing with acne. You're not dealing with chicken pox. You're dealing with AIDS. You're dealing with chlamydia. You're dealing with gonorrhea. You're dealing with syphilis, deadly diseases. What protection do the kids in the public schools have against this? The public schools gives them contraceptives, because they say, oh, the kids will do it anyway. So there's no love, and immediately the girls become pregnant, and they become mothers at 13 and 14. Or they go to an abortion clinic where their unborn child is murdered, and they must live with that for the rest of their lives. The fact that they've murdered their own child. And is that going to produce a happy life? They will always have that on their conscience. There are some girls who have aborted their babies, and every year they think, gee, if I had let that little child live, he would now, or she would now be 12 years old, 13 years old, 20 years old. They never forget. That's what happens to their life. Is there love in their lives? Oh, I imagine sometimes, perhaps if they're lucky, love will enter their lives somewhere along the line. But they go on welfare, they can't complete their educations, they are trapped. And what do they have to look forward to? Poverty, instead of the joy and happiness that God has given us. You see, when God gives us a gift, He expects us to use it wisely. Supposing somebody gave you $1 million, what would you do? Go to Las Vegas and put it all in the slot machines? No, you'd invest it, you'd decide to do something with it so that you could enjoy having that kind of financial security. But the kind of morality that's taught in the public schools is similar to the one where take it and go to Las Vegas and put it in the slot machines, lose it all. So God has given us great gifts, but if you don't believe in God, if the teachers don't tell you that God exists, then you don't even believe that you have these gifts. The gift of life. That's the first gift, the gift of life. Right in this city of Tulsa, thousands of unborn children have been deprived of that gift of life. They have been murdered, and they're being murdered today in this city. Do you know that it's a bigger crime to jaywalk than to murder an unborn child? Pretty crazy society in which it's a bigger crime to jaywalk than to murder an unborn child. There's something wrong with a nation that is going down that path. The public authorities like to tell us that they're concerned about the welfare of children. How come they're not concerned about the welfare of those unborn children? Those children have been given the gift of life, and that gift has been taken from them, ripped out of them. That great, marvelous gift that God gives us. And we deprive millions of children. 1.5 million unborn children in the United States are deprived of their gift of life every year. To my mind, that is criminal. And we're going to have to suffer the consequences of that. Already, 18 million unborn children have been deprived of their gift of life. That's a very tough, that must weigh very heavily on the conscience of the American people some way. Because you have a lot of people in this society who have murdered unborn children and don't think that that does not affect the society you live in. If everybody, for example, is robbing, that has an impact. So you've got to thank your parents, and you've got to thank God for giving you parents who have at least put you in a place where they're going to guide you to live a productive and happy life, a spiritually enriching life. That's a very important thing to be aware of. Another advantage you will have is that we're told that we're entering the information age, the age of the computer. Well, at least you're in a school where they take learning seriously, where your skills are being developed so that when you go out into the world, you'll be able to get those jobs. You'll be able to handle the information age because you will know how to read and write. You will have the basic skills. You'll have some history and geography, mathematics, science. You'll be able to deal with the world. But what about those poor people coming out of the public schools? 30% of them come out functionally illiterate. You know what a functional illiterate is? It's somebody who spent 12 years in school and comes out unable to read at a third grade level. Can you imagine being in a school for 12 years and not being able to read? Why is that? Is it that the school, something wrong with the kids? We know how to teach reading. Thousands of Christian schools in America teach reading every day. I've seen 4-year-olds and 5-year-olds reading beautifully in Christian schools. How come they can't do it in the public schools? You have to ask yourself, why can't the public schools do what the private schools do, what the Christian schools do, what parents are doing at home? Is it that they want different results? Is it that they have a different agenda? You see, in a Christian school, what is the aim of your education here? First of all, they want you to understand what the purpose of life is. What is the meaning of life? What is the purpose of a human being on the earth? The purpose of life is to glorify God. Period. The purpose of life is not to have a good time. This is not a party. One can achieve great happiness and enjoyment and satisfaction in life because one glorifies God and receives His blessings. That's why we glorify God. We thank Him because He has given us so much to be thankful for. And if we know how to use those gifts, of course, then our glorification is intensified, because we know how enjoyable and how rich life can be. This beautiful earth, this beautiful world that we've been given. That's why we glorify God, because we appreciate that we have been born, given the gift of life. We've been given parents who care for us and are willing to make whatever sacrifices necessary to make sure that we can enjoy the blessings that God gives us. But those youngsters in the public schools, and there are many Christian youngsters in those schools, what are they exposed to every day? Well, I'm sure, how many youngsters here came out of public schools? Well, then you know what goes on in the public schools. You know what happens there. You know the kind of atmosphere. Sure, you had some good teachers there, some teachers who cared. I'm sure you did. But those teachers don't control what they have to teach. They're not the ones who decide what subjects to teach and how to teach them. Those subjects are decided by the professors of education, the behavioral psychologists. You see, the public schools are run by behavioral psychologists who believe that children are animals. That all children are young animals because they believe in evolution. That there is no God, that life has no meaning, and the only meaning there is in life is whatever we give it. There is no higher meaning than the meaning that a cat or a dog has. Your cat or your dog doesn't think about what is the meaning of life, doesn't ask those questions. All they do is go over to the dish and eat or sleep. They just satisfy their appetites. That's the meaning of life for your dog or your cat. But a human being has a completely different view of these things. Human beings can speak, human beings use language, human beings have souls. But those youngsters in the public schools are told that they don't have any souls because there are no such things as souls, because animals have no souls. They're told to identify with their cousins, the monkeys. You know, you're told to go to the zoo and visit your cousins, right? How'd you like to have a gorilla for an uncle? Well, that's what they're telling you. Be kind to gorillas. But you know what happens in a public school when they keep telling the children that they are animals day in and day out? The kids begin to act like animals. Take the cafeteria or lunchroom, for example. How many of you have been in a public school cafeteria and seen the food flying through the air? Well, you see, if you don't say grace before meals and you think of your food as being the equivalent of dog chow or tender victuals, you're liable to do that. Although I had a cat, and my cat was a very neat eater, she never threw things across the cafeteria. But if you tell children that they're animals day in and day out, they're going to act like animals, and that's why they are acting like animals. Back in Massachusetts, where I come from, they call some of the high schools zoos. Was your public school ever called a zoo? Well, some of ours in Massachusetts are that bad that we call them zoos because of the way the youngsters behave. But that's what's happened in our society. We are degrading human life all across the board. First, we degrade the unborn by saying that they're not human. So we degrade them there. Then when they're born, we call them little animals. And in schools, of course, then they are again told that they're animals. So we keep degrading them. What the public schools do is they want you to connect yourselves downward to the animal world and to express your animal instincts. So the emphasis in the public school is with the linking downward to the animal world. But the emphasis in a Christian school is linking upward to God. Two opposite directions. One direction aspires upward to God. The other direction aspires downward to the animal kingdom. And so you create two very different kinds of people. You know what's happening in America? We're creating two different cultures. Two different kinds of people with two different philosophies of life. You are living in a divided country. Because you come out of a Christian school with a very different point of view than children who come out of public schools. And you're going to have to live in that world. Well, how do you deal with it? How do you resist all of the corruptions and temptations? After all, you've got television sets. You're going to be going out into the world. Many of you, I suppose, will be going to secular colleges or regular state universities where all of these forces are going to impinge on you. How are we going to deal with that? How are we going to deal with the rock music, the television, the partying, the drinking, the drugs, the free sex? How are you going to deal with all of that when you get out? You're going to have to draw on the resources that you gained here, on the spiritual strength, on the armor of God that they are trying to give you. What is the armor of God? It's the protection that you need to resist evil. The forces of evil in this world are very strong, and a lot of young people are succumbing. They are ODing on drugs. I'm sure you know of that. Becoming drug addicted. Do you know that the increase in cocaine use in high schools is alarming everyone? 14% of the youngsters in high school now use cocaine. 41% smoke marijuana. They're on the road to self-destruction. They're killing themselves. They don't have the armor of God. Their resistance has been removed. They don't know why they should say no. They don't know how to say no to these things. They don't know how to say no to Satan. They don't know how to say no to corruption. But what you're being given in a Christian school is the armor to permit you to say no, emphatically no, because you know what's right. You know what will give you happiness. You know what will give you fulfillment. You know what will make your life a blessing and a glory to God. A blessing to your parents and to your own children that you will someday have, because you're going to have families. But you're going to have to live in a society where the majority of people are under these strong corruptive and polluting pressures, and many, many are succumbing to them. In a way, you've got to separate yourself from them. That is perhaps the most difficult thing that Christians must realize. The Bible tells us to separate ye from evil, separate ye from the unbelievers. But we live in a country where we believe in freedom, a pluralistic society, and yet you see the evil ones, the corrupt ones, won't leave us alone. Don't you believe for 1 minute that simply because your Constitution says that you have religious freedom, that the other side is going to let you enjoy that freedom. They're going to try to bring you over to their side. They will offer all kinds of temptations to make you betray your God. You see, because they don't like the fact that you don't go along with them. They don't like the fact that you are impervious to that kind of corruption. They don't like the fact that you can say no to evil and to drugs. They don't like that. You see, because it makes them look bad. See, they have to look in the mirror every morning when they get up. And then they have to compare themselves to you, and they see you thriving, healthy, learning, able to get good jobs, able to move up into society, have good families, strong families. They're going to envy you. And they're going to want to take away whatever you have. So you're going to have to defend yourselves politically. Because the other side, the humanists, we call them, they're people who don't believe in God. The humanists want to control America. They want to take over this country completely, and they want to deprive you not only of your religious freedom, but of the blessings that you gain as a result of your beliefs and your faith. So you've got to be on your guard in every respect. You've got to know what's happening in your society. You've got to become aware. You cannot permit your lives to be dragged down by the abortionists, by the drug addicts, by the sexual freedomists, by the pornographers, etc. Because that's what they want to do. They cannot take seeing your example. It's very difficult for them to live in the same world with you. That's why they are constantly trying to take away your freedom. In this very city, they've thrown a pastor in jail because his church cares for children. They have a place where parents bring their children every day. And the state doesn't want that particular church function to be free of regulation by the state. The Attorney General says he's very concerned about the safety and welfare of those children. Yet in this very same city, unborn children are being murdered. What about their safety? What about their welfare? Is he concerned about them? No. What hypocrisy. He's concerned about the children of parents who are more concerned about their children's welfare than any state government or agency ever will be. That's why those parents put their children in a church organization, because they really care for their children. That's why your parents have put you here, because they care for your welfare. But the state authorities naturally want to pass themselves off of really being concerned about the welfare of the young in this country. And yet there are two areas in this country where child abuse is practiced freely, without any regulation whatever. Two places where it's practiced. In the abortion mills, where the children are just murdered. I mean, if that's the extremist form of child abuse, wouldn't you say? Murder of an unborn child is abuse. And then the public school, what goes on in the public school? How do they abuse the children there? Well, in the first place, they don't teach them how to read. They turn them into functional illiterates. That's a form of abuse, to take a young mind and to teach them in such a manner that they become learning disabled. How come a child can go to school at the age of 6 years old, talking beautifully with a speaking vocabulary of thousands of words, a child who has taught himself to speak his own language? Incidentally, all of you taught yourself to speak your own language. Do you realize that? Do you realize that you did it without the help of Sesame Street? You all learned to speak your own language all by yourselves. How did you do it? Did anyone draw pictures for you? No, you began learning at the age of 2, and you began to learn how to speak your own language. So by the time you got to school at 6 years old, you were pretty intelligent, pretty smart, pretty able, learning able. Well, how come that thousands of American youngsters who do exactly as you've done get to school, and 2 years after they're in school, they're learning disabled? How come? What happened? They get stupid in 2 years of school? That all of that intelligence that they used in teaching themselves to speak their own language somehow disappears and they become learning disabled? No, it's the schools that make them learning disabled, because they use the techniques of behavioral psychology to educate them. The behavioral psychologists believe that children are animals, so they teach them like animals. But children are not animals. They have to be taught as human beings. But when you teach them as animals, they become learning disabled. That's a form of child abuse, as far as I'm concerned. And that goes on in the public schools. You hear your Department of Welfare or Services, Human Services they call it. Department of Human Services, are they concerned about that kind of child abuse? No. Are they concerned about the kind of sex education that goes in the public schools that encourages promiscuous sex? That leads these youngsters into the arena of disease and nightmare? That's a form of child abuse, but that's considered, wonderful. So there's plenty of child abuse going on in this city, and it's happening in state-condoned institutions. It's a lawful abuse. And yet where do they center all of their so-called concern? On a Christian church that is taking care of children. That's supposed to be where the abuse is taking place according to the state. And so those pastors have been put in jail because they won't get a license A license to do what? You don't need a license to love your children. You don't need a license to care for your children, to put them in a safe place. When you start needing a license for that, something is wrong in this society. Do you know that there is no regulation of the abortion mills? We don't know what they do there. I don't even know if they're licensed. They don't even tell you what goes on there, how many they kill every day. Try and find out. Call them up. Ask your local abortion, how many did you kill today? Do you think they're going to tell you? What did you do with the bodies? I don't know. Ask the Director of Human Services, what do they do with the bodies of the dead unborn children? Where do they put them? What do they do with them? How many? Do they keep track of them? Oh, they're concerned what goes on in a Christian school, in a Christian church, yes. But they don't look at the real source of abuse, the real source of crime. And you people, you young people, are growing up in a society where that is taking place. You see, I consider myself in a way much more fortunate than you, because I was brought up in a society where such things didn't happen. I was born in New York City in 1926. And in the 1930s, when I was growing up, there were no such things as abortion clinics. Unborn children weren't being killed in this country, murdered every day by the thousands. There wasn't pornography in the 7-Elevens. There wasn't pornography in the movies. We had morality in those days. In my public school, the principal read the 23rd Psalm from the Bible at the assembly. Nobody thought that that was a violation of the church and separation of church and state. Drugs? We never heard of such things. When we heard of drugs, we always thought of those Chinese in Shanghai lying in these opium dens, smoking drugs. The idea that Americans would ever be doing that sort of thing was absolutely beyond conception. No one ever dreamed that Americans would be doing what we consider to be something for primitives, for the uncivilized. Do you know that there are some people in this country who are even practicing cannibalism now? Satanists. There is a growth of satanic cults in America. And a lot of it is being promoted by a game called Dungeons and Dragons. How many of you have heard of Dungeons and Dragons? That's probably one of the most dangerous games that they get children involved. They draw you into the demonic world, the world of demons, the world of Satanism. You're drawn into it. And many youngsters who are drawn into it don't get out of it. Do you know that last year 6,000 teenagers committed suicide in America? 6,000 took their own lives. And these are kids who had everything. They come from the affluent suburbs. They have cars, TVs, video games, Big Macs, Nike sneakers, trips to Disney World, and yet they're committing suicide. Why? They've got everything. What is making their lives so unbearable that they consider death preferable to life? It's the spiritual emptiness. They've been taught that they are nothing, that there's no reason for living, there is no God, and some of them even succumb to Satanism and join satanic cults through games like Dungeons and Dragons. How does one protect you from that? The Bible protects you. That's your shield. The Bible is your best protection against that demonism, that Satanism. So, today, in America, the second highest cause of death among teenagers, among white teenagers, is suicide. Do you know what the second highest cause of death among black youth is today in America? Not suicide, but homicide. In the black inner cities, they're killing themselves. They're killing each other. That's the result of godless education. When you remove God from people's lives, when you don't give them the armor of God, they are vulnerable to the worst nightmares and tragedies. So the poor youths in the inner cities are killing each other, and the affluent youths in the suburbs are killing themselves. That's the result of godless education. That's what we're dealing with in our society today. That's what we've got to become aware of if we're going to be able to change this so that the young people in America can enjoy what at least I enjoyed when I grew up. When I was growing up in New York City, I could ride the subway at any time of day or night and not fear a thing. I could ride the subway at 2 and 3 o'clock in the morning. If you went to a show downtown, to a movie theater in those days, and you got home late, no problem. You rode home at 2 o'clock in the morning. Nobody had any fear. Today in New York, you don't dare ride the subway after 11 p.m. at night. Crime is epidemic now. As a matter of fact, I was in Dallas the other day, and the headline in the Dallas Morning News was that Dallas now has the highest crime rate in America. Not Detroit, not Chicago, not Los Angeles, not New York, but Dallas, believe it or not. In fact, that very night, after my speech, after my lecture, my host was going to drive me to a restaurant. And we came out to his pickup truck, and lo and behold, it had been broken into. A little window, a little triangle window had been smashed, and he had been robbed. His camera had been taken, his radar detector, his pistol, some jewelry. They're in the parking lot of a beautiful hotel in a suburban area. Wherever I go now, everybody has to lock their cars. I'm driven around a good deal by people wherever I lecture. I remember in Ohio, I drove all over Ohio. Everywhere we went, my hosts locked their cars, even if we parked in a church parking lot. Everybody locks their cars in America. Everybody locks their homes. Why? Because the criminals are running loose. Satan is having a field day in America because of our loose laws and the corruptive influences in our society. Legalized gambling, legalized abortion. It all begins to corrode and corrupt and pollute the fabric of our society. You have to be aware of that. And yet at the very same time, while all of that is going on, while all that moral disintegration is going on, we are experiencing the greatest technological advances in human history. The potential for happiness has never been greater. I mean, look what we have. When you fly in airplanes, as I do every day, and you see the fantastic nation we live in. The buildings, the skyscrapers, the shopping malls, the abundance, the food. What an incredible banquet is life in America. And yet it can so easily be turned into a nightmare if we don't realize the forces that we're up against in this world. That's why your being here in this Christian school is such a blessing to you. You will be able to enjoy this banquet of life. But remember, you must also be aware of the forces that are going to try to prevent you from enjoying it. Not only the forces within this country, but the forces outside this country. You know, there's a communist monster all out there that wants to destroy all of this. They hate the free enterprise system. The free enterprise system has given us the tremendous wealth and abundance that we have. The communists want to destroy that. They work day and night to destroy it. Wherever they take over, there's nothing but starvation, disease, decline. They can't even feed themselves in the Soviet Union. People stand in line all day to get a sack of potatoes. You go in an American supermarket, you don't know where to begin. There's so much you can buy. In the Soviet Union, they have to line up for any staple. In Ethiopia, where the communists took over, the people are starving to death. Don't you believe for 1 minute that it's a result of a drought. Yes, they may have a lack of rainfall, but it's mainly due to the communist government that has forced these people off their land, burned their crops. Because wherever the communists take over, they kill by the millions. That's something you should study in history. So we've got our enemies outside the country and inside the country, and you've got to face them both, and you've got to fight them both. It's a big task for you young people. It's going to be your world. Your world. You're in a good position to enjoy it the most because you have God on your side. That's the most important. You have His blessings. The fact that you are here is an indication of how blessed you are by the Lord. And you've got to show your thanks by doing the best you can. Not only to preserve Christian education, but to make sure that it grows. And to make sure that other Christian children are brought out of those public schools and are brought into Christian schools. You've got to talk to the mothers and fathers, the parents of your Christian friends who are still in the public schools, and you've got to tell them that there's a big difference. You've got to tell those friends of yours that they should be in Christian schools for their own safety, their own spiritual well-being, their own health. You see, because every child in a public school is at risk in four ways. That child is at risk academically because of the methods used in the schools, as I told you. The methods created by the behavioral psychologists that teach behavioral objectives. They don't teach you to think in the public schools. They don't teach you to use your intellect, your God-given ability to think. They don't teach you that. Then in the public schools, the kids are, their religious faith is undermined by values clarification. How many of you have had values clarification in the public schools? Do any of you remember having had it? Values training, sensitivity training, death education. And then, of course, the youngsters there are at risk morally, because who do they meet in the public schools? They meet the youngsters who are on drugs or are selling drugs, kids who are engaging in promiscuous sex, the foul language that goes on in the public schools, You can't escape it in the public school. And of course, the kids are at risk physically because of the assaults that go on in public schools. Of course, you don't read about the minor assaults. It's got to be a really, serious assault before it gets in the papers. Somebody's got to be murdered in the school before it gets in the papers these days. But kids are in danger in the schools because there are kids bringing guns and knives into the public schools. So parents should be aware of these risks, these dangers to their youngsters. And instead of going to Disney World, go to the Holy Land. You will see Bible prophecy fulfilled with a vengeance. Because the Jews are back in their land, and Jerusalem is now in the hands of the Jews. And that's a fantastic experience when you go there. So if any of you get a chance to go on one of these tours to the Holy Land,